The United States doesn't just have a welfare system per se. I know I use that phrase, others use that phrase, but it's really not a system. It's simply a mishmash of government programs that have been developed over many decades, each one for different purposes. And for many decades, nobody had a clear picture of how benefits stacked and where the cliffs came.
Hello, welcome again to the episode of the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance. Ginn, I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on someone who knows a lot about Georgia policy, knows a lot about poverty relief initiatives, and is just a good person just in general. And it's none other than Randy Hicks. Randy, welcome to Let People Prosper show.
Thanks, Vance. It's great to be here. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. It's a pleasure to have you on. We've got a lot to talk about, but before we get going, let me go ahead and read your bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So, Randy Hicks is the president and chief executive officer of the Georgia Center for Opportunity, an independent, nonpartisan organization that conducts public policy research and mobilizes community resources to ensure that every person, no matter their race, past mistakes or circumstances of birth, have access to quality education, fulfilling work, and a thriving family life. Prior to his time at GCO, Hicks promoted family strengthening initiatives as the associate director of Stronger Families in the Seattle area, and as an assistant to the president at Focus on the Family. Hicks also served as the principal speechwriter and community liaison for California State Senator and former California Secretary of Education, Marion Bergeson. Hicks earned his bachelor's degree in political science from the University of South Carolina and a master's in what's that?
Southern California.
Oh yeah, sorry, Southern California.
Yeah, that's
a big difference.
You can't do that.
No, definitely not. Sorry about that. And he also went to Biola University in Los Angeles. He and his wife Marilyn are the parent of 6 adult children, the grandparents of 3, and reside in Sewanee, Georgia. So, with all that, Randy, let's get right into it. Why do you do what you do every day?
I love that question. And it's probably a good thing to ask ourselves each morning when we wake up, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Because, there is a grind to life. But I would say, the first thing is faith driven. I'm a Christian, and I believe that fundamentally, the living out of one's faith requires that you love God and you love your neighbor. Mm-hmm. And so whether I was in business or in ministry or running a think tank, that would be my mindset. It's how do I love my neighbor with whatever I'm doing? And so that's one aspect of it. Obviously, with our focus on poverty, it's the concern about neighbors who are at a disadvantage and maybe suffering. There's also a family dynamic here that has contributed to why I do what I do. I was raised in a family where my parents modeled lives, lived for a purpose larger than themselves. And my 4 siblings and I have all kind of followed suit at some level. So Just watching my mom and dad do what they did certainly prompted me to think about serving in the way I do now. And then the last thing is just, it's the question of hope.
Yeah.
Hope is a fascinating subject matter to me. Hope is the anticipation that tomorrow, the circumstances of tomorrow will be better than today, right? You and I have lived out lives, even during hard times, where we had that kind of hope, and we live that way. Yeah. Even in the midst of loss and pain and suffering, we still live with hope. There's a spiritual side of that, obviously, but there is a real life side of it. And just the thought that there are millions of Americans who really have a hard time anticipating a tomorrow that's better than today, that troubles me. It makes me want to do something about it. And so those are the things that kind of get me up in the morning and get me to work.
Yeah, I love that, Randy, and I'm a Christian too, and so you're exactly right. That faith keeps you going. No matter the circumstances that may be around us, we have a we have another purpose, to be fruitful and multiply, and serve God in those capacities. And, it's really been a pleasure to know you and be a friend of yours and work with you on a lot of these issues for a number of years now. And so your passion for these issues really shows in so many ways. And also the way you talk about things, Randy. I've learned a lot from over the years of how to reach out to different audiences. And I wonder where that comes from. Is that from your passion? Is that from things you've learned over time? Where did some of that come from?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I think a lot of it simply comes from a desire to communicate in a way that a receiver would want to be communicated to. Right? It's practicing receiver-oriented communication. And if I believe that there's a message here that I may have or we may have that somebody needs to hear, it behooves me to not just say it in a way that I think I would want to hear it, but to think about ways that someone else might receive it. So whether you're in a room full of people on the left or the right or a mix, the idea is to reach people.
Yeah.
So it just makes sense to think about how, what drives and motivates them. How do they see life? Why do they hold the positions that they do? And when you do that, quite frankly, you have to ascribe positive motives. If you think they hold their positions out of ill will or some sort of negative impulse, you're probably not going to communicate very well.
Right.
But if you believe people are well-intended, generally, even if you're wrong, it's better to assume it and to communicate in a way that is respectful and then help them understand how what you believe actually matches up with what they hope for.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And I've tried to work on that. My more classical liberal, lowercase libertarian view of the world and how I see things through my Christian lens as well. Oftentimes I want to be like, look, this is the way, I want to stay principled but I've learned over time from you and from others, of that what we say really matters and how we can help influence people and define the narrative on certain things. I mean, your point about if we're talking at them instead of understanding how we're talking to them as people, or just it can go a long way, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. Just talk to them as you would want to be talked to. You wouldn't want somebody to back you into a corner with motives and reasons that you really don't hold. Well, don't do that to somebody else. Assume the best as you communicate to them.
Yeah. Wise words there. So what about some of the priorities that you have at the Georgia Center for Opportunity? What are you working on? What are some of the key things that you're working on there?
Yeah, well, at the Georgia Center for Opportunity, as you know, we work to remove barriers to opportunity for low income and poor Americans. We work on what you might call the defining American idea that everyone should have the right or have the opportunity to achieve a better life. As you read this in my bio, everyone should have an opportunity to achieve a better life, regardless of race or the circumstances of one's birth. I say that, but at the very same time, the reality is that that's really just a human longing. That's not just an American idea. We may call it a defining American idea. That is a human longing. It's the reason why people come to the United States is because they think a better opportunity awaits them. What is troubling in the midst of that is that oftentimes immigrants do better than native citizens, right? People born here. And it's often people here who have lost that sense of hope. So we want to work on removing those barriers. And we really work on removing those barriers in 4 different areas. First, the 3 building blocks of a flourishing life: education, employment, and family life, family formation. There are all these barriers that keep people from getting the education they need, the job they need, and the family they want and need. So we want to look at policies and remove barriers that keep people from getting to access to those things. Then the other thing we do is work on public safety. The reason we work on public safety is because the people we want to help most are often in communities where public safety is hard to come by. And what we know from research is that Unsafe communities are communities where social mobility is lower for some obvious reasons. There's emotional and mental instability in just dealing with crime. But on top of that, jobs move away from a community. People can't get to jobs even. So we work on public safety as well, just recognizing that it's in homes, neighborhoods, and communities that people get the education, the job, and the family they need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now go ahead.
So we've been working on advancing school choice. We passed an ESA bill this last year. Very happy about that. That was great for the state of Georgia. As you know, a lot of our work around employment right now is centered around something we'll probably spend a fair amount talking about during our conversation today, but that's around safety net reform, doing a lot on that front, largely because when you're talking about the safety net, the American safety net, whether this was intended or not, the reality is that I just mentioned 3 building blocks of a flourishing life. The safety net discourages 2 of them. It discourages work and it discourages family formation.
Yeah.
So you're robbing people actually of the building blocks that help them build that flourishing life. Again, I don't think that was the intent.
Sure.
I want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but the programs are structured in such a way that it hinders people's access to those kinds of things. Yeah. And so that's a huge priority for us right now, is giving states flexibility to do things differently.
Yeah. Yeah. As you know, I love those things as we work on this together and all the work that you've been doing on this. And it's interesting too, because the family formation, I read a good book recently called Troubled, by Robert Henderson, where he talks about the instability of the family. He went through, the child welfare system, and was bounced around a lot. And some he was abused, and others he wasn't. And he really talks about how when you look at stable families versus unstable family, just huge differences that can happen. And a lot of that is driven by a lot of the public policies that are out there. And unfortunately, in his case, he was kind of an orphan early on, so he was pushed into this situation. But I think it gives us an idea of what you're talking about here, of the importance of getting policies right to ultimately preserve liberty to where people can do what's going to be in their best interest. But understanding that there are going to be people that fall in the cracks of poverty, from sometimes no fault of their own. Sometimes it's from government influence or other things that are out there. But let's make sure we're not making the situation worse for them, right? And so I when we step back and think about the problems that we face, we see that poverty is too high. We see that there's affordability crises that are going on across the country, whether it's in Georgia or in Texas, where I'm at, or other places. It's unfortunate because in a lot of ways, Randy, we see that people really want more of a top-down approach and say that government could be the solution. But one thing that I talk about on the show and with others, and we've talked about this, is too often, you're bringing this up already, it's too often there are already government failures. And so it's difficult to solve government failures with more government, because now you're just doubling down on a lot of the problems that were there. So I wonder, though, with your work and your research and your thoughts on this, where can we get started? Maybe we can start with Alliance for Opportunity or other poverty release initiatives. But where do you like to first go to think about, okay, we need to start here before we can get to where we really want to be there?
Yeah, I love that question. The reality is that lives are formed, and you've probably heard me say this before. Lives are formed in homes, neighborhoods, and communities. They're not formed anywhere else, really. I mean, There may be really some weird and rare exceptions, but that's where lives are formed. And if lives are transformed after something's gone terribly wrong, that too is going to happen in homes, neighborhoods, and communities. It doesn't happen at the government level. So the place I think we always need to begin is locally. We need to start with the family, and we need to think about that. And, I just want to say something that I think is maybe people haven't thought about it this way, but I think the thing that is most true about human beings is that we are wired for relationships.
Yeah.
It's the thing that is most true. It explains why the stories that captivate us usually are about relationships. It explains why something like solitary confinement is considered inhumane.
Yep.
It hurts to be isolated and alone. It's one of the reasons why right now we have this huge isolation, loneliness, and depression problem in the United States. We're not meant to be alone. We're relational. And I often say this.
And Randy, just real quick, I mean, the COVID lockdowns exacerbated all that, right?
It did. It isolated people.
Yeah.
It is most true about us that we are made for relationship. I often say that if we, out of some weird set of circumstances, we're given the choice between a broken bone or a broken heart,
Ooh.
most of us would choose the broken bone.
Yeah.
Because broken bones almost always heal more easily than a broken heart.
Yeah.
Which usually is connected to broken relationships with someone or some people we love. We are wired for that. And so it's what motivates us and drives it. So it's super important that when we think about things like poverty and what leads to human flourishing, that we start at that level. Don't start at the government level, start at the local level. And I would add this. A friend said to me years ago, and I think he's dead on. He said that the best government can do is deal with people as they are, right? There are certain metrics. They know how much money you make. They know how much money you owe them. They know things like that. They know whether or not you're in prison or not, whether or not you're in prison, or they know different things about you.
Yeah.
So the best government can do is deal with you as you are. But it's civil society and communities of faith that can deal with you as you ought to be and how you aspire to be. And so I just want to emphasize, when we think about poverty, we've got to think locally. And that's the starting point. And so then you go back from there and look at public policy from the perspective of how public policies impact those formational institutions of family and community.
Yeah, that's powerful. I totally agree with you on that. And it's interesting because, I mean, we had LBJ that came in and called this the war on poverty during the 1960s. Okay. And we had this great society, these new programs and all this shiny stuff that spend a lot of money. And, over this period of time, I mean, we've spent trillions of dollars on this in inflation adjusted dollars. Trillions of dollars have been spent on this. And you would think with those sort of resources that we would have solved poverty by now. No one would be in poverty, but unfortunately there still are quite a few people that are in poverty. And so I think you're right. We've really got to start more at the local level and think about, yes, we spent all this money, but oftentimes those government programs, whether it's fiscal cliffs, which we can get into, and some other things that are out there that really can contribute to a lot of the problems that people face, and disincentivizing people to work, disincentivizing people to stay together as a family. And I think that's important too, what you mentioned, Randy, earlier about the criminal justice reform. I mean, so many dads in particular, and unfortunately dads of color, tend to be locked up the most. And when that happens, that breaks down that family, which contributes to generational poverty that happens over time in a lot of these communities. And it's just unfortunate. So I'm glad of the work that you're doing with that. But maybe let's talk some more about the Alliance for Opportunity, which is Georgia Center for Opportunity, the Pelican Institute in Louisiana, and the Texas Public Policy Foundation. A lot of work driven by the one door policy. There's other things in there about empowerment accounts and a whole bunch of other stuff, but it all goes back to the things you're mentioning here. Maybe tell us a little bit about how that was started and some of the work that's going on there.
Yeah, so the Alliance for Opportunity started years ago when the leadership, Tracy Sharp at SPN, suggested that we form a regular working group of think tanks across the country that wanted to address the issue of poverty. And we would put it more positively. We wanted to create opportunity.
Yeah.
How do we do that? And so we started convening. At one point, we thought the best way to move forward was to get 3 closely aligned organizations and groups of kindred spirit, so to speak, and work together in coming up with a roadmap, a policy roadmap that would kind of give states a picture of how they can help people move from poverty to self-sufficiency, from dependency to self-sufficiency and prosperity. And so we started working together there. Now, I will say this, Vance, we've now got a dozen groups that are involved in one form or another with the Alliance, because the number of groups interested in these issues has grown pretty dramatically. And there's also an amazing amount of activity going on across the country on these kinds of issues. So we're very excited about what we're working on right now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And there's a lot of good work. I'll make sure to put the link to the website so people can go and you can look at all the different policies that are there. But I think it kind of starts with there's a lot of streamlining of these safety net programs, and maybe we start with these fiscal cliffs, or welfare cliffs in this case, where people earn a little bit more in income, they lose potentially a large amount of the safety net payments that they're receiving, to where oftentimes those safety net reductions are more than the additional income that they get. So it disincentivizes them to work. And when they get off these programs, they tend to go right back on because they don't have as much income to really be self-sufficient for the longer term. And I know that GCO has been doing a lot of great work on this with Eric there and others. And I'll put a link to that as well. But what do you like to talk about with this welfare cliff that really gets you excited, and hopefully we can find some ways to overcome these obstacles?
Yeah. One of the things, I always start with a story of some kind, because there are so many stories that speak to the problem.
Yeah.
So one of those, I often tell the story about Shannon, who on a Friday after, she's a single mom, on a Friday afternoon, she was invited by her boss into his office where he offered her a promotion and a pay raise. That's on a Friday afternoon. So here's a single mom. She's excited. She goes home in tears. She's so excited. She comes back on Monday morning and turns it all down, turns down the promotion, turns down the pay raise. And she does so again in tears, but different kinds of tears. And the reason she did it is because she was going to lose, as you said, more in government assistance than she was going to gain in pay. And the gap was going to be big. Now, I will say this is something she knows mostly by reputation. It's not like she sat down, pencil to paper, and figured it out. It's just people on welfare often know that these cliffs exist, and so they try to avoid them. But one of the things I say often, Vance, is those tears tell you everything you need to know, right? If this was just about making sure she didn't lose money, there'd be no tears. It's just a calculation, right?
Yeah.
The tears were about losing an opportunity to grow. And again, this is something you've heard me say, when you think about what it means to be human, and this is partly one of the problems with government. They can't think this way. We'd have a hard time, I should say, thinking this way. But if you think about what it means to be human, if you think about what it means to be you recognize in yourself and in others that a job is more than just a source of income, right? It's a source of pride, purpose, and belonging. Each one of us wants to know that what we do matters, purpose. And each one of us wants to know that we matter to people. Want to know that what we do matters, and we want to know that we matter to other people. That's belonging. Purpose and belonging gives us life, right?
Yeah.
And yet these cliffs they very much disrupt that longing and drive towards purpose and belonging. So what I'm excited about, as it's a very difficult issue to deal with, and the reason is the United States doesn't just have a welfare system per se. I know I use that phrase. Others use that phrase, but it's really not a system. It's simply a mishmash of government programs that have been developed over many decades, each one for different purposes. And for many decades, nobody had a clear picture of how benefits stacked and where the cliffs came. And so that's why, as you know, we created a benefits cliffs model that would show exactly those things, how it stacks up, and then where the cliff comes based on income. So that's given us the ability to give lawmakers, give community-based leaders, direct service organizations, think tank leaders a picture of what's going on here. So we're excited that people are more aware of the problem. What I'm most excited about right now is definitely what's going on at the federal level and in some states with regard to the one door policy.
Yeah.
That is the most exciting thing happening right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. And before we get there, and I do want to get there next, the work y'all are doing on benefits cliffs is huge. How many states have y'all modeled now?
I think right now we've got 14 states that we've modeled. So you can literally go on to the website in 14 states. Well, you could even do it if you're not in one of those 14 states.
Sure.
It's a website you can access.
Yeah.
But you can go into one of those 14 states. You can go all the way down to the county level in any one of those states. Because benefits vary, even some benefits vary, even according to where you live in a state and the county you live in.
Yep.
And you can enter certain factors and kind of see a model of where a person, given those certain factors, would experience a cliff as their income increases.
Yeah.
And so, 14 states, obviously you can look at it nationally as well,
sure,
but not as refined down to the state level.
Yeah. And it's really informative. It's great graphs. I'll make sure to put that up on the show notes page as well. But one thing that I was thinking about here, Randy, and I don't know if you've read this book, but How Adam Smith Can Change Your Life by Russ Roberts. And he talks about the theory of moral sentiments that Adam Smith wrote, because he was a moral philosopher. There really wasn't, quote unquote, economists around it at that time, but he was a moral philosopher who tended to talk about economic sort of issues, and was known for his work on, The Wealth of Nations, of course, in 1776. But a decade prior to that, or a little bit longer than that, he wrote the theory of moral sentiments. And in there, he talked a lot about what you were just mentioning, where we don't want to just be loved, we want to be lovely. And being lovely can go in so many other factors. I mean, there's a lot of talk about people working their own self-interest, and that's what they took out of the Wealth of Nations sort of book. But it was actually much deeper than that. It was that we want to be lovely around with those that are around us, because the relationships that we build support the prosperity that we're going to have in our own life. Now, I'm not just talking about material prosperity, okay, but psychologically, socially, all the other things that come with prosperity. And I think that helps us to understand a little bit more about what people want and how we behave and everything else. Because you're exactly right. I mean, we really want these relationships, and too often the government can get in the way of those. So I just wanted to bring that up there.
Well, Vance, it's interesting. One of my colleagues at GCO posted a video yesterday that just reminded me of the power of this. Yeah. We've got a couple employment projects in a couple counties in Georgia where we're coordinating the efforts of nonprofit leaders, faith leaders, and business leaders to help the chronically underemployed find work. And the video she posted yesterday, this woman who just found a job said, it wasn't just about being offered a job. It was about finding your place.
Wow.
And I just thought that was so powerful.
Yeah.
It really, she's talking about belonging there.
Yep.
Where do I belong? Do I matter to someone? And that's another aspect of work that people just forget. We're not as healthy. We're not as engaged. Obviously you had Dave Bonson here talking about full time a couple of months ago. Dave's absolutely right. We're wired for work. I said we're wired for relationship. We are wired for work. Yeah. I believe that from a faith perspective, but I also just believe it experientially and observationally.
Yeah.
I think the research suggests that we're just healthier, prospering more when we're working. And it's not just because of finances.
Amen. Amen. Be fruitful and multiply. Right?
That's right. That's right. Right. And that means a lot of things.
It does. It really does. It really does. Well, let's jump into some of the policy specific issues. The big one right now is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. WIOA is what it's called. But at the federal level, put in place in 2014, that really tries to find ways to bring this together with innovation and opportunity. But there are more opportunities, speaking of opportunities, to improve what's happening among the states, and including the open door policy or the one door policy that's been working on in Utah for a number of years, and other states. And I know you've been working on this, and I've been working on this too. But what are some of the things that you're excited about whenever you think about some of the things at the federal level? Because a lot of times they're getting stuff wrong, but I think this is a way that they can do things right.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it actually, Vance, reflects what we were just talking about homes, neighborhoods, and community.
Yeah.
Our policies getting in the way of local solutions.
Yeah.
And so first, we need to describe the Utah model to some degree.
Sure.
But even before that, we need to explain that Utah is the only state that integrates workforce and welfare programs. The only state in the country. Now, yep. I think a lot of your listeners and viewers would be thinking, well, that just makes sense since a job is the way to fight poverty. And yet, not only do they not have, generally speaking, welfare programs under one roof, they don't integrate workforce with any of them, except in one state. That's Utah. So if Vance Ginn is unemployed, he goes to not the welfare office, he goes to the Department of Workforce Services, where welfare programs are also housed. But the first conversation is about Vance's work history. It's about what he's capable of. When did you last work? Is there anything keeping you from work? Those kinds of conversations so that you can be put right back on course towards gainful employment. In fact, welfare programs are actually called work supports. It's really viewed that way. So work is preeminent. And so what we saw during COVID, for instance, in our research on recovery, job recovery in the 50 states, Utah's job recovery, they had the same hit that everybody else had. But the job recovery in Utah was so much faster. And they actually caught up with pre-COVID projections for employment. So what we're doing, this may sound odd, the reason why Utah is the only state that has integrated those two programs or integrated workforce with welfare is because the WIOA law actually prohibits it. When they established the workforce program at the federal level, they grandfathered Utah in, but because of the way they fund it, it made it impossible for other states to integrate workforce and welfare. So what we've done at the Alliance for Opportunity is we've been, for the past 2 years, pushing a bill that would allow states to opt in to an innovation waiver. They'd have to apply, I should say, for an innovation waiver where they say, let us try to integrate these programs, integrate workforce and welfare. And so we're excited about where that is. The House bill has already passed. There's a Senate bill that has made great progress. Right now, the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee is probably going to be meeting with the House Education and Workforce Committee to start working through what the final agreed upon bill will look like. But we are very hopeful, feel very optimistic that when this session ends, we will have many states will have the flexibility to pursue an innovation waiver to integrate those programs. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited about it as well. You know, I was just looking at a couple things here, like the poverty rate in Utah is 7.1%. It's tied for the lowest in the country with New Hampshire at 7.1%. The unemployment rate there is 3%. You know, so there are jobs that are being had. There's fewer people in poverty. And I think a lot of it does go to this idea of bringing these two institutions, government institutions, if you will, together in one shop. One door policy. And, you know, in Texas, for example, they're separated. There's the Texas Workforce Commission. There's the Health and Human Services Commission, which is most states, actually, where they have them separated and they oftentimes don't talk. And so you have more bureaucratic nonsense that goes involved. And the people that are going through these, the recipients of these welfare programs tend to just be another number versus them being a person that's going into a funnel, if you will, to come out with job and self-sufficiency for the future. And one of the things that, I'm probably gonna get this wrong, so you can correct me, but one of the things that you say, Randy, oftentimes is that government can help us to live, but not really live well or not survive. How do you put it? I like the way you put it better.
Yeah, Mauricio Miller, who's a poverty fighter, in the Bay Area, has said that government, that our welfare programs have made poverty survivable, but not escapable. Survivable, but not escapable.
Yeah.
And that's from somebody who has really lived in poverty as a child and has spent his adult life fighting poverty. He was actually a guest of President Clinton at one of President Clinton's State of the Union addresses.
Wow.
Because of the good work that he's done at the community level.
Yeah.
But he's the one who's come to believe that we've made poverty survivable, but not escapable.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is, again, we've created this incredible maze of welfare programs. So if you're a recipient, you may not just have to go to one office. You may have to go to 6 or 7 different offices. That's not a good use of time if you're wanting someone to go find work.
Right.
They're trying to navigate how to survive and trying to figure out how to make it to all these offices and solve all these problems. The beauty of One Door is it brings all these things under one roof, which means you can streamline programs. But I think one of the best things is you can start treating someone like an individual and do case management, which I think is very important as well. The other thing is that these Department of Workforce Services will have local offices. So again, I can't emphasize this enough. Get down to the home, neighborhood, and community level if you want to solve these problems and connect people to local solutions, not statewide ones, not nationwide ones, to local solutions.
Yep. I love it. And that's powerful, Randy. And so as we're moving forward and thinking about these next steps, hopefully these reforms will happen with WIOA this year and get some things started in the states. And several states have also passed resolutions in favor of this, right? So we've already got this kind of coordinated effort, if you will, of a pathway to allow for this one door policy, which I think is going to be revolutionary in so many ways, to really allow for those local communities to help people escape poverty and unleash them in so many ways so that their family can be stronger. Going back, as we're wrapping up here, the importance of families and the communities and everything else, the more that government has infiltrated might not be the right word, but I'll just use infiltrated for a second. It's created the weakening of these family units, and the family is so important. The more that we can get communities involved, the stronger these families will be. And I could just see so much. The future looks brighter from that capacity. Like you talked about earlier, Randy, with hope. To me, that provides so much more hope for the future when too often things can seem a little dim, if not downright dark in some cases. I think we can start to see the hope. And are those part of what you see for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, first of all, there's growing awareness. You just heard Mauricio Miller's comment and his perspective. But, there are other people like Bob Lupton, who wrote a book called Toxic Charity, and Brian Fickert, who wrote a book called When Helping Hurts. There's growing recognition that we're more fully human when we're engaging in some sort of productive endeavor, right? And whatever that might be, that we're just more human. And so sometimes, and this is a risk, is that when even in our charity, the charity can be more about us feeling compassionate than what's best for someone else, right? Give the handout as opposed to helping somebody, the give them a fish or teach them to fish type of concept, right? I've heard it 1,000 times at this point. Yeah. But there's this growing recognition, I think, that we have got to give people a sense of agency, and that's how they ultimately start developing hope within themselves, where they can anticipate a future that's better than the present. I think that's very, very, very important. Yeah. So I am hopeful. I think there's growing recognition. I think, a lot of people at the federal level are just recognizing that 60 plus years of the war on poverty has not worked. I think, there's this, and there's this growing sense that of the very things that we just mentioned, that it all starts local, and we've got to do a better job of giving people the ability to move themselves into a position of prosperity, which isn't just defined by money, as you know. It's defined by all sorts of things that make up a full, meaningful human life. Yeah. Yeah. Amen. It's always good to talk to you, Randy. Before I let you go, where would you say for the audience the best places to find you, and any last words that you'd like to mention for the audience? Yeah. So the best way to find us is foropportunity.org. That's our website. For the word, FOR, we're for opportunity, foropportunity.org. So you can go there and learn all about the work that we're doing. Vance, you said you're going to post the A4O, the Alliance for Opportunity website in the notes. So there you can go to those places. I would say to people, just as I wrap up here, that as we think about human beings, we ought to think about we ought to think about what it means to be us at some level. I think one of the years ago, I was facilitating a meeting with business leaders and direct service leaders. And there was a person who is kind of known as the guru or the czar of direct service in this area. And we were talking about all the things we need to do to help people become self-sufficient and prosper. And the comment that was made by this person was, they don't need those things. They only need to be made comfortable. Well, that's not true. Mm-hmm. That's what you do when somebody goes into hospice care. That's not what you say to someone who has a life ahead of them. And yet sometimes that kind of thinking can make us feel good, but it's not productive. It's interesting. I'll leave you with this quote because I think this is where we've strayed from over the many decades. FDR in his State of the Union address in 1935, this will surprise you, in his State of the Union address in 1935, said that government needed to get out of the business of relief that's separated from work. He said to administer relief in that way was to administer a narcotic, a subtle destroyer of the human spirit. And I'm going to read the quote he said here. His clearest articulation of his concern said this: we must preserve not only the bodies of the unemployed from destitution, but their self-respect, their self-reliance, and courage and determination. That's a direct quote. That's FDR. And we've strayed so far from understanding that is the longing of the human heart. And I just think we've got to remember how how people in poverty are like us. They long for the same things we do. They may not be able to dream about it in the same way anymore, but we really need to remember that.
Yeah. Amen. Wise words. I always learn something from you, Randy, and I did today. And so thank you for being on the Let People Prosper show, and God bless you and your family.
Thanks, Vance. I love what you do here. I love the program.
Thank you so much. And for the audience, I knew you would learn something, and I hope you'll take this, share it with your friends and family, leave us a 5-star rating. And remember, you can find all the show notes at vanceginn.com. You can also go to my newsletter, vanceginn.substack.com. I'll have it on both of those places where you can get all this information and all the links and everything else so that you too can find ways to help people in our local communities and try to help people get out of poverty for long-term self-sufficiency instead of just a temporary handout. And so until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.